a show for you. I'm not going to lie. There's quite a bit that's been making its way through the news right now. Just in this first hour, I'd like to give a little bit of time to talking about the legacy of an individual that many of us know very much about, Norman Geisler. He was the apologist, prolific author, and theology professor of upwards of 50 years. Passed away yesterday at the age of 86. I'll say a little bit more about him later on, but we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll be talking a little bit about what's happening in North Korea right now. There seems to be some movement relative to some of the overtures that have been happening, and so we'll share a little bit about that. Is it beneficial for President Trump to take that step into North Korea, especially from a Christian perspective, as we consider that he was setting his foot onto soil where upwards of 100,000 Christians now are sitting, estimated, in a concentration camp? So we'll talk a little bit about that. Obviously, since it's the Millennial Roundtable, we're going to have to discuss what's happening in Portland right now, some of the riots and the debacles that's happening there. Conservative journalists are getting pummeled and hospitalized, and you also have the propensity of what's happening relative to this group called Antifa. I think I've got a working theory to undergirding principles that I think are largely contributing to the violence, and so we'll talk about that. And then also we'll talk about Colin Kaepernick is in the news yet again. And not only is he in the news, but Nike, as a result, is in the news as well because of some positions that he took. So we'll share a little bit about that, but obviously we're going to want your contributions as well. And so you are going to have the chance to be able to join the conversation today, the Millennial Roundtable conversation. And so if you want to call in, you know that the phone lines will be open, as well as for those of you that are watching on Facebook right now. Hello, good to have you back. I'm sorry that you have to put up with me, but I'm glad that you're along for the ride today. It's going to be a good one. And so without further ado, David Fraga is joining me at the Millennial Roundtable for this first hour. And so I'm going to put him on the spot right here. It's World UFO Day, David. Yes or no? Are you a UFO guy or not?
I'm not.
You're not? Okay,
not.
So give us a justification. Why are you not a UFO guy?
You know, I think that people that try to argue that they've seen UFOs is they're a little bit out there.
Okay.
And so
even like the former Navy pilots that are saying this.
You know, I can't argue against that. But at the same time, I myself don't have a good stance to believe that they exist or not. So at the same time, I'm like in the middle there. What about you, Nick?
Okay, so here's my thing. Okay, so there's these UFOs have been in the news as of late. We know this to be true. It's kind of crazy just because, one, like I still vividly remember my grandmother taking me to go see Will Smith and Jeff Goldblum in Independence Day and seeing Will Smith absolutely destroy some aliens in Independence Day. But then one of the things that we're continuing to see, and this is being reported out of Fox News, these former U.S. defense officials are saying that UFOs are real. And so there was a report out just last month that indicated near daily interactions with unidentified flying objects by Navy pilots in 2014 and 2015. It's just now starting to emerge. Christopher Mellon is one of the individuals that's leading point on this, has argued that this information is nothing new and the government needs to do something about it. Okay, now, David, I know what you're thinking. You said crazy people. So Mellon is the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defense for Intelligence. He's involved in the new History Channel series Unidentified, which will expand on topics discussed in the recent New York Times article. So there,
he's talking about unidentified objects. He's not really talking about aliens.
Well, no, that's there's a delineation. There's a delineation to be made. There's unidentified flying objects, and then there's aliens. I'm not talking about ET phone in home right here. I'm talking about just flying discs that are in the air. And then for our listeners that are kind of familiar with the biblical narrative, you can go to Ezekiel 1, that some would argue from the biblical perspective of aspects of unidentified flying objects. But nevertheless, according to Mellon, they were topping out at speeds of 5,000 miles per hour. So there's some interesting research around this, and I think we need to pay a little bit of attention to it. 77% of Americans think that aliens have visited the Earth. One study found that the less religious people are, the more likely they are to endorse unsubstantiated ideas about UFOs. And as you would expect, Christians have been divided on this. So among Christian, opinions vary regarding aliens. Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis argues that our search for aliens is driven by a, quote, rebellion against God and a desire to prove evolution. But C.S. Lewis, what we know from C.S. Lewis is we know that he was this great philosophical thinker.
Incredible.
He was just this brilliant mind that just had a propensity to be able to give these robust theological arguments without necessarily pointing to the biblical narrative. He just had this subtle art form that really did advocate for biblical principles. But what we need to remember about C.S. Lewis as well is that he was a fantasy writer. I mean, you've got to give him credit for that as well. And so C.S. Lewis in his book The World's Last Night seemed open to the possibility of aliens. He said, quote, "How can we, without absurd arrogance, believe ourselves to have been uniquely favored?" So it raises this question: does the existence of aliens disprove God by proving evolution, like according to Ham? Personally, from my particular vantage point, I would argue that God made the sun stand still, he parted the waters, and he flooded the earth. He makes the mountains quake and causes donkeys to talk. I don't believe in aliens, but I do know that my God is big enough to work outside of my normative conception of reality. That's where I fall on it. But nevertheless, we have got to go to a break. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to transition as best we can from aliens. And we're going to lead off the conversation today talking about Colin Kaepernick, the former NFL QB that's been known as of late for his stances relative to taking a knee during the national anthem, now finds himself in the middle of another controversy where, being the Nike spokesman that he has asked Nike, according to Wall Street Journal reports, to pull a particular shoe off the shelves. And so in turn, Nike has decided that they are pulling a shoe off the shelves because of something specific, namely an old American flag that was adorning the shoe. And so now we're having individuals are reacting to this. One of those individuals being Governor Ducey out of Arizona, saying that he is going to reconsider and make some adjustments to the agreement that Nike and the state of Arizona had relative to their plant that they were going to build out there. But we are going to have to talk a little bit about this, but before we do, we're going to have to take a break. But when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Colin Kaepernick situation. You can go on Facebook at www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio to find the article that we'll be referencing during this time. And be sure, if you'd like to call in and join the conversation, you can do so at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When the Supreme Court ruled on the constitutionality of the Memorial Cross in Maryland, the lawyers of First Liberty Institute hoped that they would also dismiss what was known as the Lemon Test. Back in 1971, the justices created a three-part test in Lemon v. Kurtzman that made it too easy to declare any religious symbol or action unconstitutional. The recent court ruling didn't eliminate the test, but essentially set it aside. In his concurring opinion, Justice Clarence Thomas explained that the logical next step would be to overrule the Lemon Test in all contexts. He argued for that because the test has no basis in the original meaning of the Constitution and continues to cause enormous confusion in the states and lower courts. That latter point can be illustrated by the reams of paper necessary to adjudicate whether a cross memorial erected nearly a century ago should be bulldozed down because it might offend a few humanists. That, of course, is the other issue at stake. At least two of the justices raised the important question of whether an American who is offended by religious speech or religious displays even have standing to bring a lawsuit. Justice Neil Gorsuch wanted to rescue the federal judiciary from the sordid business of having to pass aesthetic judgment, one by one, on every public display in this country for its perceived capacity to give offense. He concluded that in a large and diverse country, offense can be easily found. Justice Thomas also set aside the argument that a cross is a sectarian symbol. If you think about it, every symbol, a cross, a Jewish star, a Muslim crescent, is sectarian. Kelly Shackelford declared that the days of illegitimately weaponizing the Establishment Clause and attacking religious symbols in public are over. That's why this cross case was so important. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by David Fraga, and we're going to jump into it. There's a news story that just came out earlier this morning based on reporting out of the Wall Street Journal. I posted the article on our Facebook page if you'd like to find out more information on it, but it involves Nike and Colin Kaepernick. That's right. Nike is yanking a U.S.-themed sneaker featuring an early American flag after NFL star turned activist Colin Kaepernick told the company it shouldn't sell a shoe with a symbol that he and others considered offensive. Now, the sneaker created the Air Max 1 USA in celebration of the July 4th holiday. It was slated to go on sale this week. The heel of the shoes featured a U.S. flag with 13 white stars in a circle, a design created during the American Revolution, commonly referred to as the Betsy Ross flag. After shipping the shoes to retailers, which is quite an expense, Nike asked for them to be returned without explaining why. People said the shoes aren't available on Nike's own apps and its websites. Already, the responses have been pouring in right now because of what Nike has decided to do with because of the counsel of Colin Kaepernick. Arizona Governor Doug Ducey announced Tuesday he was ordering the Arizona Commerce Authority to withdraw incentives for Nike building a manufacturing plant in the state, according to Fox News. Ducey made the announcement in a series of tweets after the Wall Street Journal reported this. He said, quote, "Words cannot express my disappointment at this terrible decision. I'm embarrassed for Nike. Nike is an iconic American brand and American company. This country, our system of government, and free enterprise have allowed them to prosper and flourish. Instead of celebrating American history this week of our nation's independence, Nike has apparently decided that Betsy Ross is unworthy and has bowed to the current onslaught of political correctness and historical revisionism. It's a shameful retreat for the company. American businesses should be proud of our country's history, not abandoning it." Okay, David, what are you thinking about this?
Man, I'm curious to see how much influence does Colin Kaepernick have upon Nike, because that he urged Nike to take these out of all their shelves and things like that. But was this even Colin Kaepernick's shoe?
No, this was just a shoe. This was just a shoe. This was an Air Max 1, had Betsy Ross's flag on the back. Yeah.
I don't see how he should have that influence, that Nike should be so influenced by Colin to do that. And what's even more curious is that I saw that they are re-signing him for a deal in September to sponsor him again. But I see the American flag, the Betsy Ross flag, 13 colonies, as a foundational, representation of what this country was founded upon. I don't see it. He said it was a connotation of slavery, but I don't see it as that at all. And so if you really knew the history, I don't know why you would see it that way.
Okay, so there's two sides of this argument, and I'm going to go ahead and lay it out there. So we've got one side of the argument that's saying this is a complete overreaction by Nike.
Right.
If you want to strip us of our historical heritage, that yes, we've made mistakes in the past, but the resilience of the American dream and the ideals and the American spirit, to quote an individual, Winston Churchill, that commenting upon Americans is that we have made it this far because we are not made of hard sugar candy. There's a resilience to us that has allowed us to, yes, we weren't perfect in the beginning, but we're closer to perfection than what we were. Better today than yesterday. And so our history is not something to be ashamed of. It's not something to erase. It's something to realize that's who we were in the past, but rather we're somebody different in the present. But there's others. And so according to if I was thinking like Kaepernick, here's the other side of the argument that can be said. There has been a recent uptick in this flag being utilized by certain neo-Nazi groups, as well as some white supremacist groups as well, specifically this Gadsden flag that continues to be perpetuated. And so what I would imagine, I haven't talked to Kaepernick, unfortunately he hasn't returned any of my phone calls, is that this is a symbol. Yes, it's rooted in history, but it's been uprooted out of history and been reutilized or repurposed in the present right now to be able to advocate for it and perpetuate some very harmful ideals. And so knowing that, David, knowing both sides of this argument, laying down on one side and tell me why.
Well, obviously, I don't think it should be used for offensive things. I think he's overreacting. Yeah, so here's an overreaction.
Here's the thing that I'm feeling the tension right now, because there's a part of me that doesn't want there's a part of me that doesn't want to cause offense, but there's also another part of me that's not going to kowtow and bend down to every particular segment and every particular signal that somebody could be offended by. And then at the end of the day, too, it's a private company. And so this private company has the propensity to be able to do whatever they will and allow the market to be able to make the decision. As Benjamin Graham said, allow the invisible hand, or rather that was Adam Smith, allow the invisible hand to be able to do what it will with this particular symbol. But then again, here's where I'll do the other side of the argument, though. Right now, Colin Kaepernick has been very successful for Nike right now. As they've continued to heed his guidance, he's been controversial, but their profit has continued to go up, right?
And do you think it's because of Colin Kaepernick?
Well, I would assume that
or just because he's involved in it.
They put him on a dang poster, and they functioned this ad campaign around him, and he was mocked on Twitter in a lot of circles, and then and it seemed like he was a source of derision for a lot of people. But at the end of the day, if money talks, money sung at the end of a quarter.
Well, it seems like Nike isn't standing on their values, or do they even have values that are pertaining to
I guess
that
their values are just do it.
Basically,
just do it and send it out, and now just do it and send it back. So I guess that's their values. And so
I mean, that's just...
one of the things like I don't know, I'm not offended by,
right?
Because at the end of the day, to be offended by something, you got to hold something closely. And in a non-shocking twist, I don't hold closely my shoes. At the end of the day, I think what I'm offended by, if there is something to be offended by, this is our history. This is the American flag. Like this is a part of who we are. I know that there are individuals that have repurposed. There are individuals that repurpose the cross. But
exactly.
I'm not allowing Westboro Baptist Church to be able to speak for the Christian faith for me. Like, what Westboro Baptist Church does with the cross isn't going to have any type of influence on me relative to my usage of the cross. And so, but then again, I'm not Nike, so I understand that. But one of the things I'm pretty frustrated about is the fact that Nike would, to a large degree, at least in my perspective, I can understand the other perspective, but at least primarily is that they're ashamed of our past, and they're ashamed of the revolutionary energy that made this American experiment so unique. And that's like what we're celebrating, right? Like, I don't know if our listeners know, the American experiment was radically different than anything else that ever happened in the history of nation states. In the history of nation states, the illustration that's best encapsulate this is that we were on an island and the government was the sea, and the government surrounded us and told us what we can and can't do. What the American founders said, and pointing to and exhibited in the 10th Amendment, is that no longer were we going to be on the island, but rather we were going to be the sea. We were going to be individuals that we, the people, were going to be able to swim in the sea of freedom in order that we might be able to pursue after happiness. Those are the same founders. Those are the same individuals that were helping, that were a part of so many things that out of that idea birthed this flag. And so that's one of the things. Yes, I know that there are individuals and groups that have repurposed it, But my goodness, I would hope that you would understand that, yes, they can repurpose it, but they can't take the original meaning from it, which is just so frustrating to me.
100%. And I think to an extent, the reason why they keep having Colin Kaepernick re-signing is because he's so controversial. And because of that, that creates people to have sides, just like what we were doing just now. And when that happens, action takes place.
Yeah.
Action's created. And so you can even see this as a way that Colin Kaepernick chose to be offended in this area in order for maybe even Nike to have people choose sides and purchase. I just came across an article that said that Nike is selling the shoes right now. Not Nike, maybe some of the stores who haven't taken them down yet are selling them for 3-4 times as much.
I'd buy
$2,000 right now.
Our Facebook audience, let me pull up my shoe right now and show you. I need new shoes right now. I'm about to go on vacation, and I'm going to be walking around a lot because I got my Apple Watch on and my steps count when I got my Apple Watch. Like, I need shoes, and those are clean shoes.
They are clean.
Clean, for our older listeners, clean is a form of being cool. It's a part of being hip. And so when I say that they're clean shoes, they're good-looking shoes. And I'm not a racist. Like, I would love to wear those shoes, especially when I'm overseas and I'm sporting the American flag. But nevertheless, we have got to take a break. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. We'll take some of your phone calls if you'd like to call in. And you can do so at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when you go there, you can go right underneath the live video box, leave a question or comment, and then what you share online, we'll try to get to over there. But we'll take a break, and we'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. We have been talking a little bit about Colin Kaepernick. Specifically, he is in the news yet again that he is an individual that apparently gave counsel to Nike shoes that they needed to rescind a particular shoe that bore Betsy Ross's flag. Betsy Ross, I was trying to remember where I kept on hearing Betsy Ross's flag, why it sounds so like ringing in my ear right now. It's because it's in Hamilton, the musical. Like Hamilton, the musical, yeah. Betsy Ross's flag, let Betsy Ross's flag hang higher kind of deal. And so it's a lyric from Hamilton, the musical. I wonder if Colin's going to ask them to pull that song.
Hey, Hamilton was a big hit on Broadway.
Yeah, so, I think they need to pull the song now because apparently they're giving mention to something like that. But nevertheless, we have been talking about this, and I think this brings up a larger conversation. I always tell you all that I wish that the microphones could be on during the commercial breaks, because sometimes the conversations are just as rich during the commercial breaks as they are during the actual show. But I was listening in on one of our producers, Steve, was sharing a little bit, and I thought this was such a key point to be made, the delineation that's being made relative to the protest that Colin Kaepernick had, that many of us took an interest in. And then it seems like we've seen the evolution of those protests from the field now to what's happened within, I guess you would argue, the boardroom of Nike right now. Because again, like there are merits and there are points to be made relative to certain protests. Like that's the beautiful part of our country. We were founded on protests, like, right? Remember, like July, like we're making our way over here because we want these freedoms that we so desperately, that we believe have been given to us by God, and government is our shared project to be able to protect. That we were individuals that protested about representation relative to England. Like we were a country that's founded on protest and continue to honor that tradition of allowing citizens to be able to protest. And so I never want to take away that. I never want to be an individual that takes away that form of protest, even if I disagree with what they're protesting. It's the classic Voltaire line of, I might not agree with your proposition, but I will defend your right to be able to voice your proposition. Like I think that's the key components of liberal, as in not our modern day liberal conservative, but liberal, true sense of the word, philosophy, this understanding that we have these freedoms and propensities to be able to share that. And so, David, I just wonder if you're thinking right now, because in this land of the free, because of the brave, you've got individuals like Colin Kaepernick that's able to share this, that's able to do this. In your projections, do you think that this is going to work out well for Nike? Do you think that this is going to come back and bite Nike? Like, thinking based on what's happened in the past, what are your thoughts on what's going to happen in the future with Nike?
I think this is going to work out well for Nike in terms of profit, because if you think about it, they released a special product out, which means they didn't make too many of them. They made only a certain amount. And then they're pulling them, yet they're still going on sale right now. You can find them in different places. Yeah. And so they're actually able to make more money off of something that's more rare. And I was actually researching earlier for an apology. Nike doesn't have a apology. So it makes me want to believe that, one, it's either a publicity stunt in order to raise prices on a special product. And two, there's a reason why they're going to re-sign Colin Kaepernick in September. So for me, that bothers me a lot, because I believe media needs to be used to build up the kingdom, to build up one another in order to impact the next generation. And so now a platform such as Nike, it seems to me they're using their platform in order to just make a profit. I was actually even doing more research about how the call centers, they already have lines, pre-existing lines, like, hey, we're sorry, but just go with it kind of deal. And I was maybe kind of laugh a little, but at the same time, is Nike too big to fail? And there's some people that could argue, no, it's not, or yes, it is. But at this point, Nike's been around for a very long time. They sponsor a lot of schools. They had to have a lot of partnerships. I mean, who's to say? For me, I think they're going to be okay. I think they're actually going to make a profit off of this.
Will you stop buying Nike if they continue to make some of these social stands? That's always the question I'm interested in.
At Nike? Am I going to boycott Nike? I mean, probably. For the most part,
so?
I'm probably not. I'm not really a Nike person, anyways.
Okay.
I'm more like an Adidas, and that's a whole.
Oh wow. Okay. Hold on. Wait. We'll get them to pay for sponsorships. My goodness, you don't need to keep on going.
No, but for Nike, I never really had anything against them until.
Perhaps this is a better question then. Is there a company that you shop and frequent that if they took a social stand that was contrary to what you believe, would you stop shopping there?
Oh man, I haven't really thought about that too much.
Because that's one of the I'm really interested. I've been doing some work with an organization called My Faith Votes that many of our listeners are familiar with. We have been doing research on it's to a certain degree, it's a form of impact investing, right? So impact investing is this new financial kind of concept where individuals are deciding, not only do when I invest my money, do I want to make more money out of that investment, get a great return on it, but I also want to invest it in companies that are that are creating positive good within the marketplace. And so what we've done at My Faith Votes, what we're doing right now is we are identifying companies that are giving to the Planned Parenthoods, that are giving to the NARALs of the world. And we're wanting to identify for individuals the links and the extent that these companies are giving to these organizations, especially if you're pro-life. And so a perfect example for this for our audience is, okay, so say end of year, you decide I want to give some money because I've always given some money to the local pregnancy center because I'm so pro-life and I want to make sure that women have an opportunity to know that they're not alone and they can do this. And so you give $1,000, but you also shop at Starbucks. Well, did you know Starbucks is given some estimates are upwards of $400,000 a year to Planned Parenthood. Or say, you like lotion and you go to Bed Bath & Beyond because, I need some lotion. Well, did you know Bed Bath & Beyond gives money to Planned Parenthood? Or say you have a Chase card. You have Chase. That's where your money is. Did you know Chase sponsors Planned Parenthood events? And so there's quite a significant amount of money. Oh, you say, well, I don't have Chase, but I have an American Express card. Well, do you know American Express spends their money to give charitable contributions to Planned Parenthood? And so what I'm trying to argue is that, yes, you're giving $1,000 to a pro-life organization, and that's so beautiful and that's so good. But you're also allowing your money to go into places, and they're using the profits of your money to be able to spend it on these pro-choice abortion industry organizations that are detrimental, that are taking money away. And so you're just coming out even, if you're even coming out even on these regards. And so we're trying to identify some of those organizations that are saying, well, yes, because then it opens up the propensity in a free market economy, just as Nike has the ability to be able to say, well, we're kind of we don't want to offend anyone, so we're not going to allow Betsy Ross's flag to be on the back of this really good-looking shoe. Well, if Nike wants to make that decision, we also have a decision that we can make in a free market economy, because we can go to X number of shoe companies to be able to satisfy our foot needs. Dr. Scholl's needs or whatever.
And that's the challenge for sure. And I know how a lot of millennials and young adults, it's really difficult for them to distinguish those things. Like, you hear about Target and you hear about other stores, but I do understand that there needs to be more intentionality, and it is challenging to really dig in, because what we want is quick and a quick transaction.
I mean, how much are you just willing to get mad about it, right? So if I'm talking to millennials right now, let's just get frank with them. Like they got super mad about Donald Trump, or they got super mad at whatever X number of protests in the 2016 election. But one of the things that they did is they got super mad about it and posted about it, but nobody came out and voted when the time came. Less than a quarter, less than 25% of millennials actually got to the polls, according to the research. I think it was like 21 or 22% actually voted. And so you can be loud all you want on social media, contra to Russian propaganda schemes. You retweeting Aziz Ansari is not going to allow you to cast your vote for Hillary Clinton. You actually got to get up and go to a polling place. But nevertheless, this is just the world that we're living in now. So we're going to have to take a break here. And when we come back from the break, we're going to continue to talk a little bit more about some of these social stands that are being taken. I'll be really interested. I'm going to pull up some of our research about some of these organizations and companies that are giving money to what I would argue are organizations that are contrary to Christian ethic. And then I'm going to be really interested to talk with David as we consider millennial perspective. What are the issues that are pertinent, and what are the issues that would keep you from spending your money if you knew a corporation was giving their money to that? So is abortion the only thing? Or how about human trafficking? Or maybe it's human rights relative to China. But we're going to take a break. You can call in 800-351-1212, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It's easy to misunderstand the law when it's confusing, but not when there are multiple clear decisions on the topic. In 1983, the U.S. Supreme Court concluded that a paid legislative chaplain is perfectly permissible under the Constitution. Then in 2014, in Town of Greece versus Galloway, the court said those prayers could even be sectarian without violating the Establishment Clause. But still, activists questioned the practice. In Mount Sterling, Ohio, village council members want to start their meetings with prayer. But activists insist that might be, quote, chipping away at the Establishment Clause. Well, that's hard to imagine, given that not only has the U.S. Supreme Court twice said that legislative prayers do not violate the Establishment Clause, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit said in the 2017 decision, Bournemouth versus County of Jackson, that those sectarian prayers can be offered by the lawmakers themselves. As Judge Sutton wrote, concurring in the en banc decision of the Sixth Circuit, quote, the United States Constitution does not tell federal judges to hover over each town hall meeting in the country like a helicopter parent, scolding, revising, okaying the content of this legislative prayer or that one, unquote. First Liberty Institute represented the County of Jackson in that case because we believe that all Americans, even elected officials, should be free to pray or not before public meetings and according to their own conscience. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined by David Fraga here at the Millennial Roundtable, and we have been talking about social stands, and so how some of these companies are advocating for particular social issues, and they're making social stands in the marketplace. And, you know, to a certain degree, they're being rewarded for it. And so I think we need to, there's two recent examples that we can give. And then I want us to argue from a Christian perspective, is it healthy for us? Is it right for us? Is it true for us to be able to take some of these stands? And so let's just look at some of the research right now. And so the research would indicate that millennials significantly want companies to take social stands. the majority of millennials want these companies to take social stands. Not only that, but we can also point to research that it's not just millennials either. That 67% of consumers that were recently surveyed indicated that they want the companies that they support to take social stands on issues. And so they want your phone company to take a stand on equality. You want your peanut company, your peanut butter, to take a stand on equality or whatever. And the reason why I keep on mentioning equality is because a recent bill, which serves as a really prime example, is helpful for us. So the Equality Act that just was passed in the House of Representatives about a month ago, trying to create a new class of people to protect LGBTQI individuals. It passed in the House. It probably will not pass in the Senate. You've probably heard it here before because in certain individuals that have been on this program would advocate against it because it would eradicate any type. It would do harm to religious liberty within the United States. But nevertheless, when the bill was first introduced in the House in 2010, it's shocking, David. I'm going to tell you how many companies actually were. No, actually, I'm going to tell you this first one. In 2010, Equality Act introduced into the House, there were 4 companies that supported this bill. In 2010, 4 companies that came out in support of this bill, put their name behind it, and said that this is a bill that we need to see passed. In 2019, do you know how many companies were put their name on this bill?
How many?
205 companies put their name on this bill.
These are big companies?
Big. We're talking about Apple.
Okay.
I'm not talking about Larry Brown's Electronics in Cookeville, Tennessee. I'm talking about Apple. So there's just this significant movement right now. And that, again, at the end of the day, in a free market economy, businesses' primary goal is to please consumers. And one of the things that's clear right now is that consumers want their companies to take social stands. But this goes against kind of the whole myth of what Michael Jordan reportedly said, that even Republicans buy shoes. Like the reason why Jordan wasn't going to take a social stand is because he decided that Republicans bought shoes, and so he wasn't going to take a stand, and he largely kept his political beliefs to himself so that he could sell his shoes to both Democrats and Republicans. And it worked out pretty well for MJ, if I do say so. I think it's gone pretty well for him. I think he's just barely making it right now. Right. So then this raises a question for you. I'd be really interested to hear.
Absolutely.
So as a millennial, and then just from your perspective with your friends, are there certain issues that you just cannot support a company if it were to come out, or is it really just a push for you? Like there's not really a position that a company can take that would cause you to stop shopping and frequenting an organization?
I mean, I would say there are certain things that could.
Okay.
Especially if, for example, for grocery shopping, that's something I love to do. Or when I go on Amazon a lot.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I feel as if they probably do have a lot of social stands, but I honestly don't hear about them a lot. It's because my intention behind buying something is to use it in order to do well, be healthy, but at the same time also to use it to impact the kingdom. But at the same time, personally, I don't look into that stuff too much, even though I should, honestly, probably do that more and more. And I know some of my friends actually do.
Do they really?
Yeah. So for shoes, for example, there are some people who are huge supporter for Toms.
Okay.
In order to help, provide shoes in other areas, right? But for me, I'm looking into that a little bit as we go.
It makes things. I'm not gonna lie to you. I'm super lazy.
Yeah, it makes things complicated in a way.
The idea, it disturbed me to my core to know that Starbucks, to the degree that they are supporting Planned Parenthood,
right?
It hurt. It hurt because I give them a lot of money,
right?
I give them, and if I'm really pro-life, then how can I continue to support Starbucks, which is such an active contributor to the Planned Parenthoods and the Narrows of the world? And I kind of always root it back in the biblical narrative to 1 Kings 3. 1 Kings 3 was one of the first decisions that Solomon had to make after he got all his wisdom. There was 2 women, 2 mothers that came to him in the middle of the night, or came to him the next day. one woman killed her child, essentially, and she stole another woman's child. So as you can imagine, you've got these two women that come before the king, needing his wisdom, needing his judgment. And so King Solomon is now forced with the decision of whose child is this, because both mothers are claiming the child. King Solomon, in his wisdom, decides that he is going to cut the child in half, and so he's going to split the child to them. One mother who stole the child, she was gleeful, she was happy essentially that the child was going to be killed. The other woman, that was the actual mother, decided that she did not want to see the death of her child and said, no, just give it away. And she was willing to the extent that she was so for her child, she was willing to give up her child in that moment. And it makes me, it raises this question for me, to save the child in the womb, the 2,400 children that will die today because they are aborted, what am I willing to give up?
Right.
This woman was willing to give up her child. Am I willing to give up my Starbucks? Am I willing to give up my spending patterns and make life a little bit more uncomfortable for me, just because I've become so accustomed to the convenience that so many of these organizations offer? That it raises my awareness when I hear about these types of stories. And so I'm keenly aware of that. But then I look back on the past, and it's just I wonder about the effectiveness of it, right?
Exactly. And that's what I was literally just thinking. Does what you do matter?
Yeah,
and it does to an extent, but I feel as if it's where you're applying your energy of the impact.
Yeah.
So whether it's creating, I don't know, a group or a movement, or it's even doing what First Liberty does, protecting religious rights and things like that.
I wonder, because the example I always go back to in the 90s, you had the boycott of Walt Disney World by Southern Baptist Convention, and I don't know the metrics by which anything changed, because this boycott of at the time I think it was around 22 million Southern Baptists at that time that decided they were going to boycott. And how many of them actually boycotted Disney? I don't know if there was any measurable change, but it does point me back to Maurice Talleyrand. And Talleyrand had the quote where he said that without individuals, nothing changes, but without institutions, nothing survives. And so, yes and amen, we need to be armed with the language and the numbers to be able to hopefully make that change, but then two, to be able to create institutional change to such an extent that hopefully some of these metrics can begin to move. And so it just raises a whole host of questions that we will have to get to after this break. And so we're going to have to go to a break. But when we come back from the break, I'm going to be really interested. We're going to have Michael McAfee that's going to be joining us in studio here for the next hour. We're going to talk a little bit about North Korea. Michael's got a new book out. Can't wait to talk to him about that. And then we're going to go to Portland. I wish we were going to actually go there, but we're just going to go there from a rhetorical standpoint, and we're going to talk about what's happening in Portland with the debacle. But we've got to take a break, and we'll be back, though, right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151. Or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts. And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, on this Tuesday, July 2nd, 2019 day. So grateful that you have decided to join us. And we have got in studio the one, the only Michael McAfee. Michael, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks
so good. So good to have you here today. We've got quite a show on this. I don't know if you know this, Michael. It's World UFO Day.
Really?
It's World
Today?
UFO. Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah. Okay, so I got.
Is this because of the Will Smith movie?
Well, one could only hope. Like, I remember seeing. Well, actually, now that you say it, because it came out around this time in 1996.
Didn't they first see him on the first or second?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad Will Smith's still alive. I'm glad we have Jeff Goldblum, Bill Pullman are still making sure that our country is safe from that which is in outer space. Yeah. There's like crazy stats. Like there's the less religious you are, the more likely you are to believe in aliens. You know that? Or like 67% of Americans believe in extraterrestrial life.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. Are you an ET guy? Do you believe in aliens?
I'm not. But
this was not a question you were expecting me to ask.
It was not. I did have someone give me a compelling biblical case for aliens one time.
Really?
And they quoted Jesus, who said, "I have sheep not of this fold."
Wow.
And they're claiming that means there's aliens out there.
Okay.
Jesus cares about.
Okay, so like we talked about this a little bit earlier. Like I was because there's obviously there's reports that are coming out now. Like Fox News has been reporting on it. Former Defense Department officials, like Navy individuals within the Navy, are saying that we've been seeing these things for years. One report indicated that it was going upwards of 5,000 miles an hour. It's like. And so there's Ken Ham of Answers in Genesis is a guy that's gone against the fact that if there's aliens, it's outside of God, and it's just man's natural inquisition that's trying to find something outside of him. And so he's very hard.
He's on the other side.
Hard against aliens. But then C.S. Lewis kind of makes the argument that, we have a God that made the sea stand still, parted the waters, makes the mountains quake, had a donkey to be able to talk, and who's to say that he can't do something like this as well? And so I'm finding myself in the tension. I don't know where I fall on it. This is me trying to brush the question off from my own self because I don't want this to be used again.
Yeah.
But happy UFO Day. Michael.
Thank you.
It's
to you.
Okay. So we have got quite a show for you. I promise it's not going to be anything like this first little stretch. We're going to.
We can only hope.
We're going to talk a little bit with Michael about his new book that's come out. The man has been everywhere. Every time I get on social media, every time I see something on Fox News, something on the internet, it's just Michael and his wife's face. They're just everywhere right now. So we've got to talk about the book that everybody's talking about right now and that you need to get your hands on too. You can go to the Point of View website at pointofview.net to be able to grab your hands on this book. And then we're also going to talk about what's happening in Portland right now. There's just been some clashes that happened over the weekend, and a conservative journalist by the name of Andy Ngo has suffered tremendous, was sent to the hospital with some brain injury stuff, and has made his rounds on CNN as well as Fox, etc., to really highlight some of the violence being perpetuated by this group called Antifa. And this I've got a working theory, two ideas that really support the ideology and the philosophy of why Antifa does what they do, which kind of points to some of the seeds that have germinated not only in this very violent group of people, but it's just a part really of kind of the millennial Gen Z culture about ideas and ideas being violent and hateful ideas being justification for violence as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, I want to talk about this book, because you got to tell our audience more about this book that everybody is talking about right now.
Sure. Well, the book is called Not What You Think, Why the Bible Might Be Nothing We Expected, Yet Everything We Need. And at the core of the book, we are trying to rebrand the Bible for the next generation.
Okay.
So the product is perfect, not trying to change the product at all, but there is while there's still a strong love or a general respect or admiration of the Bible, there is not the level of engagement that would match the level of, respect that we give it in our culture. And so we're sort of asking why in the book and trying to help identify for ourselves how the Bible has impacted our world in ways beyond the church that people don't recognize, to make an appeal to say, the Bible's easy to dismiss culturally, but there's something here that's worth engaging in.
Yeah, well, because you all enlisted Barna, correct? Barna to do some research for you all?
Well, we didn't enlist them, but we used a lot of their research, some from Pew and ABS, who worked with Barna, et cetera, and just kind of looked at a combination of our experience as millennials, 30-something, I'm 31, as well as that data to see, does it match what's really true of the millennial generation, 20, 30-somethings. And so
what's some of the stuff that you're finding? Why is there the lack of appeal? Like, what is it? What's the rationale behind individuals not engaging with the biblical narrative?
There's two big buckets, and then there's kind of sections in each of them. But the one is cultural perceptions. And so this is a book that was written a couple thousand years ago, plus different time, different people. And so not to mention, so there's already this gap from when it was written to today, not to mention the gap between a biblical worldview and a secular humanistic worldview that we have today. And the second piece just being a people issue, that I've been hurt by someone that claims to love this book.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that we try to deal with, to say we recognize the cultural perceptions of why this book doesn't seem to fit in our modern context. We recognize that you may be like many of the people in our life and have suffered harm at the hands of people that claim to love this book, but there's still something here in this book. There's still something to say for a book that has transcended thousands of years of history, that's still as popular today as it ever has been, that you should read it for yourself.
Yeah, I think about that, and I think about some of the older books that still have an appeal, like Gulliver's Travel is one, Odyssey is another. So I don't know, and again, we know that this isn't an ordinary fight, right? Like, we know there's spiritual powers and principalities of the air that are at play in this as well. But I think that's going to be something that I'm really interested to tease out with you. But right now we've got to go to a break. And so when we come back from the break, we're going to have more with Michael about this book. And I want to tease out with him just kind of that dichotomy that he's presented about, as to why individuals aren't engaging with the biblical narrative, whether because of the antiquity, kind of the old nature of it, or rather just because it's just kind of they've been hurt by someone in it. Because I think that's really prevalent right now. We can look at that's a kind of I don't want to say excuse, but that's a reason as old as the biblical narrative, but also as recent as even today's headlines as well, of individuals that have been hurt by the church. But we're also going to open up the phone lines for you if you'd like to ask a question as well relative to engagement of the biblical narrative among millennials and Gen Zs. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or you can make your way over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, in that live video feed if you want to just leave a little question or comment underneath there, and then what you share online we'll share over air as well. And then also you have the chance to be able to get your hands on this book too. You can go to the Point of View website at www.pointofview.net, click on Michael's face, and when you click on his face, it will take you straight to that book. And so we have got to go to a break, but when we come back, more with Michael right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When the Supreme Court ruled on the constitutionality of the Memorial Cross in Maryland, the lawyers of First Liberty Institute hoped that they would also dismiss what was known as the Lemon Test. Back in 1971, the justices created a three-part test in Lemon versus Kurtzman that made it too easy to declare any religious symbol or action unconstitutional. The recent court ruling didn't eliminate the test, but essentially set it aside. In his concurring opinion, Justice Clarence Thomas explained that the logical next step would be to overrule the Lemon Test in all contexts. He argued for that because the test has no basis in the original meaning of the Constitution and continues to cause enormous confusion in the states and lower courts. That latter point can be illustrated by the reams of paper necessary to adjudicate whether a cross memorial erected nearly a century ago should be bulldozed down because it might offend a few humanists. That, of course, is the other issue at stake. At least two of the justices raised the important question of whether an American who is offended by religious speech or religious displays even have standing to bring a lawsuit. Justice Neil Gorsuch wanted to rescue the federal judiciary from the sordid business of having to pass aesthetic judgment, one by one, on every public display in this country for its perceived capacity to give offense. He concluded that in a large and diverse country, offense can be easily found. Justice Thomas also set aside the argument that a cross is a sectarian symbol. If you think about it, every symbol, a cross, a Jewish star, a Muslim crescent, is sectarian. Kelly Shackelford declared that the days of illegitimately weaponizing the Establishment Clause and attacking religious symbols in public are over. That's why this cross case was so important. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined by Michael McAfee. We have been talking a little bit about the new book that he has just come out. Michael, you've been all over the place talking about this book.
It's been a lot of fun.
Okay, so what's been your favorite interview besides me for this book right now?
Just everything else it pales in comparison. It's such a distant second.
Obviously.
No, we got to go on. Honestly, my favorite interview was we spoke with Lauren Green from Fox. She had not only read the book, but had a lot of just really good questions, hard questions on her segment. So anyway.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay, and so you were sharing a little bit about this book, and so you said there's two rationales as to why individuals aren't engaging with the biblical narrative. And so the first being, let's just take the first one,
Sure.
for instance. And so individuals that have been hurt by the biblical narrative, by individuals that claim to be Christians. And
Right.
so tease that out a little bit for us.
Yeah, so whenever there's been research studies conducted, or just whenever through experience you've seen this, that you ask someone, hey, do you read the Bible? And if they say no or not anymore or something, you say, well, can you talk to me about what happened? It's always a story about a person, right? And so, well, my pastor growing up, betrayed our family. And so, or this person, the Sunday school teacher, whatever. And so the temptation then is to immediately try and disentangle the Bible from this hurt. And that's the right thing to do long term, but it's often then perceived as you kind of sweeping under the rug this hurt and this pain that was very real in this person's life. And so the first thing that we try to do, and that in the book, what we're doing, it's written ultimately to Bible disengaged millennials in many ways, to the next generation, trying to appeal to them to engage with the Bible. But we did that in a lot of ways because Tim Keller's Reason for God had an impact on us. And that's a book written to skeptics, but it's so helpful to me and other Christians. They're going, how do I deal with my skeptical friends? So that was our hope, is that as we wrote it, we tried to have the conversation where we identify and don't rush to defend the Bible, but just affirm the hurt.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me that there's a quote from Bob Goff that that goes along with something along the lines of, he says, the best advice that I was ever given when I was in a dark place was a hug. Like, and sometimes I don't need I don't need a theology in that moment. I don't need a biblical defense. I don't need a justification as to the brokenness of man, even though this person's following after Jesus. I just need compassion in that moment. And instead of trying to defend the Bible, it's just kind of live out the Bible and the kindness that Jesus has shown to us. And so it seems like the research indicates.
Like, give a better story, right? Like, they've had a bad story, a bad experience with this person, rather than try to defend the Bible in the midst of that bad experience. Give them a positive experience as you live out the incarnate word.
Yeah. And then tease out the second piece, because the second piece is interesting just because it seems, and again, I'm not the individual. I think that what we do is we distinguish ourselves from the rest of the animal kingdom by our reason, but I don't think we're reasonable beings. I think we're highly emotional beings.
Yes.
That there's been some very logical, inconsistent arguments as to why individuals aren't reading the Bible, and one of those, it seems like, is it's an old book and it's just not relevant. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, there's been who knows how many Christians or would claim to be Christians that saw a tweet or a status update with one verse from the Bible taken out of context, that's from the Levitical law or whatever, inserted, and just kind of made fun of, this is something that, this is the book that you believe is the Word of God.
Yeah.
And then to go, okay, well, I don't know that I believe that, so I must not believe the Bible. And then the house of cards kind of comes tumbling down. And so what we want to say instead is, and this is where we kind of land, is if you were taught the Bible by Dr. Billy Graham himself or Dr. Richard Dawkins, renowned atheists, like, it doesn't matter. Have you read it? Have you read it? That's kind of the challenge that we want to give. That hits both the Bible disengaged that criticize the Bible sort of from afar, from a safe distance, and those that would claim to be Christians that aren't engaging with the Bible as well. And so we try to kind of, like any generation throughout human history, we're blind to our own cultural glasses that kind of give us a way of seeing the Bible. So the only way to overcome those or step around those is to just identify them so that we can see our own blind spots when we approach the text with our modern kind of view, and then try and say, if you're going to judge this book, you really should get to know it from the inside before making a judgment on it thousands of years later.
So when speak to the pastor that's listening right now, the pastor that's listening that's got millennials in his church right now that's trying to get them engaged in the biblical narrative. Right. What would you say to him?
Definitely. I think first off that using the Bible is a great way to go, because millennials, we have a problem with organized religion. We like just spirituality. I'm speaking obviously generally. There are many like us that love the local church and love Christianity. But that's another thing, local church, right? That's an authority structure. We reject all authority, not just the church. And so going to the Bible and saying, hey, have you read this story, I think is a compelling means of evangelism because it's a safe distance from both those institutions. And it's something that an informed person should read. No. So I would say helping them to see the story, helping them see, kind of giving them those markers. I mean, seeing the meta narrative of creation, fall, redemption, restoration, of taking them to Jesus. And I would start by just kind of deconstructing their wrong views of the Bible. And so if they're not reading the Bible, and if they're skeptical of the Bible, they probably assume the Bible doesn't care about the things I care about. I care, and we'll talk about this later in the show, but I have a passion for immigrants and refugees, or I have a passion for the poor or whatever. And so broadly, the culture often paints people that love the Bible as not caring about those things. So then when you show them that the Bible cares about all people, the dignity of people, even the fact that the human rights that we care, that both sides are fighting for today, that's a movement that rose from the Bible, that then you begin to kind of knock them off balance to say, well, maybe I have assumed some things to be true about this book because Bill Maher said it.
Yeah.
And if I read it for myself, I might find something that surprises me.
Because I think that's one of the interesting things. Like, so David Brooks has talked a little bit about this. Jonathan Merritt's argued a little bit, and even Michael Ware has. They've all pointed to like this loss of an inability to, not even from a religious standpoint, but just we've lost some of that religious vocabulary within the kind of our dialogue today. And so David Brooks has been arguing for not arguing for, but he makes a point about the reintroduction of the idea of sin into the conversation today. You've got Michael Ware that points in his book and Restoring Hope, or I think it's Restoring Hope, that he argues that he points this picture of people in the White House not knowing the idea of the least of these. Like we have individuals that are just these common vernaculars that are derived from the biblical narrative that individuals largely just aren't familiar with anymore, just because they haven't engaged in the biblical narrative.
Right.
And so it points to the reality of one that, especially from a Christian standpoint, I don't need to defend the Bible. The Bible's like a lion; it's going to defend itself, right? But then also, like, it's just really helpful to. It's a really good book. It's like it's a well-written book. And there's an argument to be made just from a cultural standpoint to read the biblical narrative, just to be conversant in the conversation that we're having here in the American experiment, right? It seems like.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's why, I mean, again, Richard Dawkins, who is by no means a defender of biblical faith, has defended that the Bible, the King James Version, should be taught in public schools for that very reason, based on literary merit alone. And so that sounds like an evangelical idea of trying to slip the Bible into public schools, but he's saying, no, exactly what you're saying, that we have this common language. So much of it is derived from the biblical text. And I think that if people are honest and engage the Bible honestly, that so many of our ideals, I mean, so much of just basic morality comes from the biblical text that is worthwhile, even if you don't consider yourself to be a religious person. Because many people like to say today, I'm spiritual, not religious. At least to engage with it, and at least to have the honesty that if we're the open-minded generation we claim to be, the Bible deserves a seat at the table. Let's let it have its say. And ultimately, if it's breathed out by God, we know it's good.
Well, he starts it, and he'll see it to completion, that's for sure. And so we have got to go to a break right now, but when we come back from the break, we're going to kind of transition gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about what's happening in Portland right now, and just kind of, you talk about the idea of being able just to disagree with one another. It's just becoming increasingly difficult to even do that in Portland and not suffer violence right now. So we're going to highlight what's happening there and talk about just why it's happening and what we can do and what we're to think as Christians. But we've got to go to a break right now. But if you'd like to join the conversation, you can call in 800-351-1212. If you want to find out more information on Michael and his book, you can go to the Point of View website at www.pointofview.net. But we'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I am joined here by Michael McAfee. We have been talking a little bit about his book, but we're going to transition because I love Portland. Portland's a phenomenal city. It always makes me feel like I'm not cool. Because there's just so much hipsters, and I like my coffee. I like a little bit of coffee with my coffee because I like so much sugar. And so but what is happening in Portland right now is just shocking, Michael. It's just absolutely shocking. So let's recap what's happening right now. So we've got a conservative journalist by the name of Andy Neo. He's with Quillette. He went to Portland over the weekend to document some of the protests that were happening there. There's now, granted, there were a lot of groups that were made up in these protests right now. There's groups that were like the Proud Boys is one that's more of a right wing kind of group. But there's also a group that continues to perpetuate violence wherever they are, that has now that just enacted a lot of violence over the weekend. And this group is called Antifa. That's short for anti-fascist. And so Michael, or Andy rather, has taken an interest in going and documenting what's happening with Antifa wherever they are. Well, this weekend, when he went to the clashes that were happening, the protests that were happening in Portland, he got more than he signed up for. And so he says, and also the video indicates, he was attacked amid the rivaling protests in Portland last weekend, and he's calling now for the mayor to address these policing policies in the city surrounding the protests. He told CNN on Tuesday, quote, "How many more people have to be beaten and attacked in the city of Portland before things change? I am by far not the first one. There's been many other incidents that have happened since 2016, and the policing has remained the same, which is a policy of not engaging with the militant protests." Mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, said in a series of tweets that the city stands against all forms of violence, regardless of someone's political leanings. But what happened to Andy was that he was hospitalized with multiple head wounds. And so to paint a picture of what was happening is that the rivaling protests skirmishes began to emerge. And so Andy, being just taking an interest in what was happening with Antifa, has followed them around the country. He goes there to try to document it and tries to make sense of it. And what happens is they notice him because, again, he's the one that continues to pop his head up and documents them. And so they start to attack him. Now, the way that Andy described it, which I thought this was fascinating, Michael, the way Andy described it is he said that he was within eyesight of police officers and within City Hall as well as the police department. Yet they did not stop it. They continued, and you see the pictures. The pictures are available on our website at pointofview.net. He was hospitalized, for goodness sake. He had multiple head wounds. And now here's what we do know. The city of Portland is trying to respond. They're investigating. But I just wonder why they didn't stop it in the first place. And so it's distressing, Michael, when you think about it, just because this is the U.S. This kind of stuff isn't supposed to happen here, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we take for granted how we have protection. I mean, right? Like whenever you travel to other places around the globe and you recognize, if something went down, there's no one around to protect me. We come to just assume and depend on that protection. And clearly he didn't get it. I mean, what do you think? How should, Christians respond to this when we obviously want to give the benefit of the doubt or try and assume that people would do the right thing, and yet at the same time you're faced with a horror like this that you can't understand.
Yeah. So for me, there's two underlying ideas that I think are at the root of kind of the Antifa as well as what we continue to see. The first is the idea of concept creep. Concept creep is the sociological term that when you expand a definition of a particular word to an extent that you almost dilute it of meaning. And one of the classic examples of concept creep is the idea of trauma. Back in the 70s, trauma was defined as a physical agent receiving physical change. And so trauma would have been, I got a head injury. Trauma would have been I got hurt when I was fighting. There's physicality to it. Well, now trauma encompasses not just simply physical harm, but also emotional harm as well. And not just emotional harm that would be psychological in nature, that would be evaluated by a doctor, but also just the idea of trauma would be difficult. So hence the reason why you have these microaggressions on campus, why you have these trigger warnings to keep individuals from experiencing disequilibrium within their emotional being. So, but the second point builds on this idea of concept creep, and it's not simply just the idea that we've expanded the idea of a definition, but also when you have hateful ideas that are being perpetuated, that justifies violent behavior. There's an individual named Jonathan Haidt, wrote a book called The Coddling of the American Mind that's been making its way around the rounds probably this past year. And what Haidt argues is, or he accentuates rather, the research that indicates that a growing number of Americans believe in either one, the heckler's veto of silencing individuals that are perpetuating hate, or two, justifying their violence because of the hate. A recent poll indicated that upwards of 20% of college students said that violence could be justified in regards to hate speech. That 55% of Democrats and 39% of Republicans said in a recent survey that you can that it's right to silence hate speech. Now, that's problematic, especially if I'm a Christian, just because I've got a message of love, but it's kind of hard to swallow the fact that I'm not perfect. And this gospel message is going to be offensive, and not to say that they're going to beat us, but what we do know in the biblical narrative is that persecution is inevitable for the Christian, for that who lives a godly life, according to 2 Timothy 3:12. And so now I think there's obviously merit to the argument because we're seeing it played out. But it just seems like we can't even have conversation anymore.
Right. Well, and that's with us. I'm curious what you think. We're clearly becoming more and more polarized as a society, and as we have now, the social media and 24-hour news cycles and things like that. It's like the noise is getting louder and it's getting more divisive, and I don't know how it gets quieted so that we can come to the table to have a conversation. Because in the same way, like we were talking about last segment with the Bible, the reason why I'd encourage pastors to talk to, millennials who are trying to reach with the Bible to surprise them is because they have these preconceived notions of what it is. And you have to almost like blow their mind of, maybe there is something I can learn from here. Mm-hmm. But when it comes to society today, we're so polarized. How do you even get to where both of you can learn from each other?
Yeah. I think that's one, I think there's a merit to it that, man, we're just living in a very loud culture right now. Yeah. And I think we can all agree that what happened to Andy is reprehensible. It's disgusting. It's very clear, biblical narrative, very clear. But if we pivot from this and we try to figure out, well, then how do we give a hearing to the biblical narrative in such a loud culture? It reminds me of, David Foster Wallace has that famous Kenyon college commencement address, and he opens up with the parable of the two fish that are swimming along, and one fish turns to the other fish and he says, and the water feels great today, and the other fish responds, what's water? That we're just constantly surrounded by it, that we're unaware of it. Well, with information, the argument that he's advancing is this reality that it's not necessary you're equipped to be able to think, but the real goal of an educated mind isn't to be able to offer up your thoughts on everything, but to pay attention to certain things. And so how do you one, especially from a Christian perspective, how do you make the Bible worthy of your attention, right? Like how do you advance that in such a way that you can say, well, I think the Bible is worthy of attention. Do you have any initial, I know that you're a teaching pastor. This is something that you're wrestling with, right?
Yeah. I think that again, there's several reasons that people don't engage the Bible, and one of the big ones is it has no application, nothing to speak to me in my life today. And so by sort of shocking the conscience and showing that no, the same things at the heart of it. Ecclesiastes is a great book, right? And so She's like, at the heart of it, there's nothing new under the sun, that these pursuits that we have of pleasure and power and wealth and all these other things ultimately are going to run dry, and that the only thing that the Word of God itself claims that is going to be eternal is the Word of God and our soul. And so what you do with those defines your eternity.
And I'm going to be really interested, because when we come back from the break, I think I want to forecast. I want to be I want to give a pessimistic forecast. And so if there is going to be a world that the Antifas of the world continue to populate, and they don't just see hateful ideas as justifying their violence, what does it look like for the Christian that has a message of love but can be offensive? How do you communicate that and start those conversations? We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It's easy to misunderstand the law when it's confusing, but not when there are multiple clear decisions on the topic. In 1983, the U.S. Supreme Court concluded that a paid legislative chaplain is perfectly permissible under the Constitution. Then in 2014, in Town of Greece versus Galloway, the court said those prayers could even be sectarian without violating the Establishment Clause. But still, activists questioned the practice. In Mount Sterling, Ohio, village council members want to start their meetings with prayer. But activists insist that might be, quote, chipping away at the Establishment Clause. Well, that's hard to imagine, given that not only has the U.S. Supreme Court twice said that legislative prayers do not violate the Establishment Clause, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit said in the 2017 decision, Bournemouth versus County of Jackson, that those sectarian prayers can be offered by the lawmakers themselves. As Judge Sutton wrote, concurring in the en banc decision of the Sixth Circuit, quote, the United States Constitution does not tell federal judges to hover over each town hall meeting in the country like a helicopter parent, scolding, revising, okaying the content of this legislative prayer or that one, unquote. First Liberty Institute represented the County of Jackson in that case because we believe that all Americans, even elected officials, should be free to pray or not before public meetings and according to their own conscience. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The program interrupted my conversation that I was having. And so, welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined by Michael McAfee here at the Millennial Roundtable. And you know, one of the things that I want us to have a conversation about is that I want to be pessimistic with you all, and hopefully we can tease out this part of it, because I think this is going to be interesting and perhaps practical, maybe to a certain degree. And I'm glad we have Michael here, because Michael's a teaching pastor, and he's got just a pastor's heart to him as well. That's just I just really respect. And so it's what's happening in Portland right now. If we project that out and we assume that within however many years this is just going to be an idea that continues to germinate within the American psyche, especially among younger audiences, and then begins to characterize the entirety of the American experiment. And that germination that I'm talking about is that antagonistic spirit towards ideas that are considered that are contrary and that are considered hateful. And that's what always, I mean, your research clear. There's individuals that feel hurt by the church, individuals that are very antagonistic towards the gospel message, because again, it's a stumbling block. I mean, at the very core of what it is, I mean, it's one of the greatest love stories that there is, but it also reveals how we're Hosea. We're unfaithful, and nobody wants to be that, especially when you've been on the receiving end of an earthly relationship, perhaps where you've had unfaithfulness in it. And so I wonder, like, from your, tease out for a little bit, like, how do you help individuals have these type of conversations about the biblical narrative or about God, what have you, spiritual conversations with a culture that's increasingly antagonistic and that will continue even in the face of like violence too,
yes. Right, absolutely. Yeah, I have heard it said, and I agree with this, that you think about the bridge analogy, you know, that God's over here, sin's over here, and Jesus makes the bridge. And the reality is that is still today the Lord, I'm for all evangelistic efforts, so the Lord still absolutely uses that. But as a culture, we're in such a different place today than we were a generation ago.
Oh, yeah, completely agree.
You need a second bridge to get to the first, to get to that bridge.
Oh, yeah.
Because we are not coming from a place where we're assuming that there is a God who I have wronged, that I have this chasm between me and God. We have gods of our own making, and God's great with us. God thinks we're awesome.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that there is, it is why, when you do look at the trends, that there are, for the millennial generation, next generation, 30s and under, that there is a small group that is highly Bible engaged, about 20% less. Yeah. There's a group that is skeptical, even to the point of hostile, that's also at about 20%. But you have the overwhelming majority. You have 60% that is open or maybe even positive, friendly towards the Bible, but at worst neutral. And so you have the vast majority that we can win over, but they live in a culture that does not point towards a code of morality that we all must upkeep, but sort of says, live out your best life. And if anyone tries to stop you, they're the bigot.
That's true.
So now we're in a position where we're not just disagreed with, but we're actually the problem in society, according to a lot of cultural elites. That
I want to build on to that, because I think we've just seen the passing of two giants of the faith in our culture that I think are endemic of just the shift that's happened. So one, you have Billy Graham. I do not think and I know there are individuals that would argue with me, individuals that have been on the show before. I do not think we're in a place in which a Billy Graham type of event could happen again today. I don't think people are yearning for what happened with Billy Graham. There wasn't as much entertainment at the time. God used Billy Graham tremendously, but I just don't know if that big tent revivalism attracts millennials anymore. It seems as though it's more personal in nature, and that's just my understanding. And I could be wrong. I probably am wrong. Maybe I'm not wrong.
And by the way, Gen Z is worse. Yeah. They would rather play video games at each other's homes individually than come together. So
I just don't. So I think we've seen the passing of like a Billy Graham era, and then just recently. Yesterday, Norman Geisler passed away. And Norman Geisler, I mean, for one generation, that man wrote 100+ books, was taught for 50 years at a graduate level relative to philosophy and apologetics. Well, apologetics, giving a defense for the faith, apologetics is premised upon the idea that individuals are asking questions about the faith, where I just don't think individuals are asking as many questions about the faith as they traditionally have been. Because I think the research is clear with Gene Twenge. I think individuals largely think they're going to heaven. And so they've got the answers. And if they got the answers, they're not asking questions. And so it forces two shifts then. So in one, individuals aren't coming to the big tent revivals that Billy Graham, and two, individuals aren't asking questions. And so what does that require? I would argue that it requires much more personal, one-on-one, 2, it requires us to create cognitive dissonant moments where we're not trying to have the right answers, but we've got to ask better questions to stir disequilibrium within individuals. And I think that's a huge shift, but I also think that perhaps in the providence of God, where individuals are increasingly antagonistic towards individuals telling them contrary ideas to their ideology, that us asking questions might be the way for us to be able to navigate through this increasingly antagonistic storm that we're about to go into. Instead of telling people they're wrong, asking people about the questions that they are asking people questions about the answers that they already have come down to. Am I crazy?
No, I completely agree. I mean, as we were writing the book, it's not the subtitle, but kind of our tagline through marketing has been, the Bible is easy to dismiss, but what if there's something we missed?
Mm-hmm.
And that was intentional, and it was doing exactly what you just said, which I'd encourage any pastor or parent or, just Christian to think in that way of, number one, what we're doing in that statement is we're identifying with the perceived cultural problem that the Bible doesn't fit into our modern society. So you can read a verse in the Bible out of context about slavery and say, this is not God's word, and throw it aside and never read again. Bible's easy to dismiss. But what if we're asking a question to follow up? What if there's something we missed? What if this book that does transcend cultures and history and on and on does have something to say? Wouldn't we want to know about it if we're going to be this open-minded generation? And so I think that if we are going to be heard, and if we're going to be thinking not just how do we transform the culture in the next 2 to 6 years or whatever, but how do we transform the culture for 50 years from now, we have to think exactly in the way that you're talking about, which is to ask hard, deep questions that unsettle people so that we can create in individuals a longing, kind of point out the disconnect between what they say they believe and what they actually know to be true.
Yeah.
Right? Because everyone knows inherently that people in Portland that are being attacked, or people at the border that aren't being cared for, that is wrong. There's something wrong with that. And yet you can't explain it from secular humanism or from Darwinian evolution. It only comes when people have inherent dignity, value, and worth because they're made in the image of God.
Yep. You know a line is crooked because you believe that there is such a thing as a straight line. You cannot call a crooked line if you don't know a straight line. And so how does that change? How does that change us? And 2, how does that change how we respond to the culture around us? But we have got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, more with Point of View, we're going to we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we'll also be talking about some of the recent news that's coming out right now. North Korea. I'll be really interested to hear y'all's thoughts on North Korea. We've got our president has taken historic steps, specifically taking steps into North Korea. Was this a positive thing? Was this a negative thing in light of everything that's happening, or rather that hasn't been happening with North Korea? We'll kind of discuss the merits of that. And then we'll also talk about some of the border conditions right now. There's been some news that has been breaking relative to some closed Facebook groups and some negative antagonistic remarks. And so we'll try to sort through all of that. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back, more from Point of View right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you've decided to join us on this Tuesday, July 2nd, 2019 day. I'm joined by Michael McAfee. We have been talking a little bit about what's happening in Portland. And so to recap you, if you didn't join us for that very first hour, Michael was sharing a little bit about the new book that just came out. His book talking about ways to be able to help a new generation to be able to engage the biblical narrative, and really just seeing the needs of it and seeing some of the rationales as to why individuals aren't engaging in the biblical narrative. One, because they feel like they have been hurt by someone that is a Christ follower. Two, because the classic argument that's just not relevant, so old, and really does a great treatment of how to help millennials, how to help this Gen Z generation to be able to reignite a passion for the biblical narrative. You can find out more information on that book on our website at pointofview.net. And while you're there, you can also find out about what we were talking about relative to Portland. In Portland right now, we know that there are protests that were happening over the weekend. That one conservative reporter from Quillette, Andy Neo, ended up going to the hospital with injuries because of one just thug group, Antifa, anti-fascist is what it's short for, were perpetuating some harmful and just were very violent, attacked him to such a degree that he made his way to the hospital. And really that was their whole mentality is rooted on the idea of one, a concept creep, of the idea that concepts are expanding to include that trauma is no longer something, physical action that's done to you, but now trauma includes certain ideas that are contrary, that are harmful to you. And that, two, the next principle being that harmful ideas justify violent behavior. And so we talked a little bit about that, especially in light of being Christians. What does it look like as we're increasingly going into a hostile culture to the claims of Christ? How do we respond to them as well? And so we're going to switch gears now, and we're going to talk about what's happening in North Korea right now, is what I'm really interested in hearing from you about, because we had kind of a historic moment that happened over the weekend. Many of you know that President Trump was over there for the G20 summit, and he made his way over to South Korea, and from there he was going to meet with Kim Jong-un over in South Korea. And lo and behold, not only does he meet with Kim Jong-un, but he takes another step, and he becomes the first U.S. president to step foot into North Korea. And this was through the heavily fortified demilitarized zone. Greeted by a beaming Mr. Kim, the president stepped across a lower concrete border marker at 3:46 local time and walked 20 paces to the base of a building on the North Korean side for an unprecedented camera-friendly demonstration of friendship intended to revitalize stalled talks. This was a small step for man, but was it a giant leap forward? So to give historical perspective, when Ronald Reagan went to the DMZ, he said he was, quote, between the free world and the armed forces of a system hostile to everything we believe in as Americans. George W. Bush came to the border shortly after he included the North Korea in the axis of evil. And now we find that President Trump has not only gone and visited yet again for the third time with Kim Jong-un, but has now decided that he is going to engage with Kim Jong-un to the extent that he made his way over in North Korea. And coming as a shock, Michael, this has caused individuals to kind of have varied responses to this, both the positive and negative.
Yeah. From your research, I mean, from what you've seen, what do you make of those who have positive and negative responses? I mean, what are they each kind of grounding that in?
It's so crazy. So here, let's give two. I'll give two responses that I think are super interesting, and we'll let you all respond as well. We'll open up the phone lines, and so you can call. What's your response to President Trump, him stepping into North Korea? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Well, you have one. If this is the Millennial Roundtable, let's go with one millennial. So we've got Charlie Kirk, who is the head of Turning Points USA. He tweeted, quote, "Trump is a peacemaker. Using strength and toughness, he exerts America's dominance without war and with using dialogue. This is what real, all caps, diplomacy looks like. Total win, Nobel Peace Prize." That's on one side. And then on the other side, you have an individual. We'll go with Jonah Goldberg, who was of National Review. Jonah said, quote, "The reason no previous president did it wasn't that it was hard to do, but that it was hard to get something out of the North Koreans that would justify giving them such a PR bonanza." And so you've got two sides that are really making arguments. I wrote about this in the daily briefing on Monday, and it was shocking, some of the response. Actually, it wasn't shocking because I'm used to individuals responding, especially around the President Trump piece. But what was interesting was that individuals really were for this pressing towards peace, and they were using the biblical narrative to do so. So they were talking about in Matthew 5 how Jesus calls us to be peacemakers, and peace never comes idly. Peace requires peace. So I guess you can kind of make a biblical justification. Kind of.
This is a larger kind of observation, and this probably isn't right, so I'll let you correct me. But I think that part of the difficulty or the tension with, especially you look at President Trump, and there's a lot of tensions with President Trump as a Christian, is that there's a understandable tension between being principled and being pragmatic. And so while President Trump has been pragmatic, he's not necessarily, in my mind, principled in that he has enacted great policy. I mean, great decisions as president that I can affirm, that I can get behind. He's done some things that are really regrettable that he should be rebuked for. But in all of it, my assessment is that he is making decisions based on what is going to help move the ball forward in whatever area. So for him, clearly going to North Korea and taking steps onto North Korean soil was that in and of itself, walking somewhere isn't wrong, but it's what it symbolizes, right? And I don't think you can make the argument that it's nothing or that it doesn't matter, because actions do matter. And while we want peace, it is a question of, are we going to be principled in our pursuit of peace, or are we going to be pragmatic in a pursuit of kind of what's going to be politically expedient?
Yeah. And we're going to have to go to a break because I really do want to argue this. I want to hear from you. I want to go back and forth with Michael on this as well, because I think this is worthy of a conversation. And so you can call in. We want to hear from you. Do you think President Trump should have gone on North Korean soil? Do you think this was a good thing that he went and he continued to meet with Kim Jong-un without precondition, just did it to do it? So you can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And for those of you in Facebook land, you can reach out to us with the comment box, and you can do so at www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Live video box right underneath there. Go ahead and leave a comment or question, and what you share online, we'll try to get to over air as well. But we got to take a commercial break. But when we come back, we want to hear from you. North Korea, good thing, bad thing.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
When the Supreme Court ruled on the constitutionality of the Memorial Cross in Maryland, the lawyers of First Liberty Institute hoped that they would also dismiss what was known as the Lemon Test. Back in 1971, the justices created a three-part test in Lemon versus Kurtzman that made it too easy to declare any religious symbol or action unconstitutional. The recent court ruling didn't eliminate the test, but essentially set it aside. In his concurring opinion, Justice Clarence Thomas explained that the logical next step would be to overrule the Lemon Test in all contexts. He argued for that because the test has no basis in the original meaning of the Constitution and continues to cause enormous confusion in the states and lower courts. That latter point can be illustrated by the reams of paper necessary to adjudicate whether a cross memorial erected nearly a century ago should be bulldozed down because it might offend a few humanists. That, of course, is the other issue at stake. At least two of the justices raised the important question of whether an American who is offended by religious speech or religious displays even have standing to bring a lawsuit. Justice Neil Gorsuch wanted to rescue the federal judiciary from the sordid business of having to pass aesthetic judgment, one by one, on every public display in this country for its perceived capacity to give offense. He concluded that in a large and diverse country, offense can be easily found. Justice Thomas also set aside the argument that a cross is a sectarian symbol. If you think about it, every symbol, a cross, a Jewish star, a Muslim crescent, is sectarian. Kelly Shackelford declared that the days of illegitimately weaponizing the Establishment Clause and attacking religious symbols in public are over. That's why this cross case was so important. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Anti-Semitism, go to viewpoints.info/antisemitism. Viewpoints.info/antisemitism.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Michael McAfee. We have been talking a little bit about North Korea. Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing that President Trump took that step that no other president has done? When you think about, especially from the Republican perspective, you said that you have individuals like Ronald Reagan. He says that he was standing between the free world and the armed forces of a system hostile to everything we believe in as Americans. It's a pretty bold claim, especially when he said that a few short years later, North Korea would experience a drought to the extent that hundreds of thousands of people would die. It would literally shrink the population to where they were shorter because they were so malnourished. That you have George Bush that would come 20 plus years later, and around 20 plus, or no, probably less than 20 years later. He said George W. Bush would come to the border shortly after he included it in his Axis of Evil. I'm really interested. I'd love to hear from you. There's an individual named Michael Montaigne, a French writer, 19th century. He says that there's nothing more boring than a conversation in which everyone agrees. And so I'm looking forward to hearing your comments. And so you can call in your thoughts on, is it a good thing or bad thing that President Trump went to the border and stepped across the North Korean border? 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Let's go on out to Charles in North Carolina right now. Charles, are you there?
I am.
Hey, Charles. First off, we got to know: are you a North Carolina man, a Duke man? This is, or maybe you're a Wolfpack.
Oh, I'm a Wolfpack fan.
Oh,
Nice.
really?
Dark horse.
Yeah. Okay, Jimmy V. Okay, I feel good about that.
Jimmy V. Yeah.
I love
it. I was in Texas. I was in Bible college in Texas in '83 when they beat Houston for the national championship.
Wow. And the infamous run. Unreal. Well, Charles, tell us, what's your point of view?
I am very much in favor and support of President Trump and his efforts to try to establish some kind of rapport with North Korea's leader. In my opinion, that is a almost unearthly situation that those people are living under there.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, only a personal relationship with Kim is going to be an avenue where anyone can have any influence outside of some kind of total military intervention. So I'm behind him all the way. I pray for his success.
Mm-hmm. So you think that the reason why you would argue that he needs to go and make this move, or it was a good move to make, is to be able to help the Christians that are suffering there?
Undoubtedly, that has to be a significant part of it. Yes.
Okay. That's a good take. Charles, thank you so much for calling in. We appreciate it.
Thank you for your efforts. God bless you.
Yeah. So Charles brings up a really great point, but again, we want to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. To give you a picture of just the horror that's happening over there in North Korea, it's estimated there's upwards of 100,000 Christians that are being put in concentration camps right now. We have reports that are coming out that indicate that these are not only Christians that are in these concentration camps, but if a guard can convert or cause a Christian to recant of the faith, according to a report out of Canada, that they are rewarded with a kind of a type of bonus, essentially, if they can get a Christian to recant of the faith. Wow. That these are individuals. Fox News has reported that there is instances of being being murdered, two being steamrolled. I mean, it's just absolutely atrocious what's being done right now. To give you a picture of what's actually happening inside the camp right now, because I think this is important for us to understand what's happening. There are around 25 million individuals that are in North Korea, and they are all, if you're of age, you have to work. In their system, you are forced to work for the state to be able to make your keep. And so you kind of heard the phrase, you've got to earn your room and board. Well, you have to earn your room and board within North Korea, except you're not given the liberty of being able to get out unless you pay. And so what you have is you have a system by which you have to work this government job, but this government job does not pay you. It's just you're paying your way in, but that's not enough to survive. And so what they found is that individuals have to, one, bribe the officials and guards in their jobs to be able to allow them to escape those jobs so they can work another job so that they can live in order to be able to purchase the food and necessary survival items. This is life in North Korea right now, that there's a huge trade that's being opened up, and it's only increasing right now in North Korea, because there are individuals that are selling their daughters, and they're selling women as brides and in the trafficking business over into China right now in North Korea, because, again, it's a way to be able to survive. There's just an awful system that's happening right now. And so there's some of us, because I'm of the mind, and again, you can disagree with me if you like. I love what our president has done in so many ways. I love what he's done with ISIS, about how he's just been unrelenting to try to squelch what ISIS has done in Syria and Iraq. I love what he did in Turkey with Pastor Brunson, to be able to rescue Pastor Brunson home. I love what he did domestically relative to tax cuts. I love what he did relative to deregulation, almost 22-1. Every regulation that was put onto the book, 22 were taken off the book. I love the hard stances that he's made. I'm not the biggest fan with tariffs, but I love how he's fighting for us relative to China, the currency situation, as well as the intellectual property. I love some of those efforts. I am not a fan of him going to North Korea and just going there to restore the relationship, knowing that he shook the hand of a man that has literally killed thousands of people, especially Christians right now, and kept them in these type of camps, rewarded their guards for getting Christians to recant from the faith. It hurts me. It just hurts me. And it also reminds me, though, that it's just so important to be able to pray for our brothers and sisters, right? Like to know that there's a church. And it's kind of crazy to think, people don't know this. Kim Jong-un's great-great-grandfather led a revival movement in North Korea. Like, it's unreal, like the history within that family relative to the Christian faith, but how much that has changed over the years. It's just an important, and especially from a pastoral standpoint, I know that you would have a word of the prayers mean something, like to pray for that God hears our prayers, one, and then two, there's a biblical injunction for us to pray for the persecuted church, and that's a church that needs prayer for, right?
Absolutely. And I think, especially for pastors and for small group leaders and people listening, that the way that we pray shapes the hearts and forms of the prayers of the people that are under our influence. True. And so we are commanded in Scripture to pray for governing authorities and those over us. And so we absolutely should pray for our president, regardless of who she or he is. Mm-hmm. But in addition to that, when we look at what is happening in North Korea, I think the lens you just gave it through is right, in that we first look at it through a lens of, as a Christian, and not just first, but I mean, I think about, I don't know how it works when you go to the eye doctor office, but you have that thing that comes over you, and it's like, it feels like there's 100 lenses on it, and it's like that first one or whatever, in other words, like, I interpret my relationship with America or my relationship with politics or anything first through my understanding of what it means that I am in Christ. And so when I look at brothers and sisters in Christ overseas, I have more in common with my Christian sister in North Korea than I do my good friend here in America that is not a believer, because we share Christ in common. Yeah. In Acts 2, they had all things in common because they had Christ in common. Yeah. Like they may have had nothing else. They could have spoken different languages, for all we know, on the day of Pentecost. But you have Jesus in common, and that's the most important thing. And so those people that are under persecution are co-heirs of the kingdom of God and are being treated terribly by a man. And so we should, we obviously, no one is going to be against the idea of there being a peaceful conclusion to America and North Korea's relationship, but we have to keep in mind how that there are consequences to any of our actions, that especially that from our leader, that we must, as Christians, advocate for other brothers and sisters overseas, even while recognizing, like you said earlier in the show, persecution will always happen, will always be a reality.
Well, we have got to go to a break, and so we'd still love to hear from you, your thoughts on President Trump stepping into North Korea without precondition with Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We have got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, more from Point of View right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. We have been talking a little bit about President Trump, North Korea. Was it a good thing, a bad thing that he stepped into North Korea, onto North Korean soil, became the first president to do so? No precondition whatsoever, no agreement that had been worked out, simply just to try to build up the relationship. And so we have opened up the phone lines, and you can call in. We'd love to hear from you. Do you think it's a good thing? Do you think it's a bad thing? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And so we're going to take a couple of phone calls right now. And so we've got Forrest in Georgia right now. Forrest, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Forrest. Okay, first question, though, before you can give your point of view, we're asking, before we go to Trump, are you a Georgia man, Georgia Tech man? What?
I'm a Bulldog.
Oh, Bulldog. Okay. You guys got a pretty good coach down there.
Yeah, he's doing a really good job. I think we in Alabama need to learn how to play that 5-man defense.
Oh, that's the dang truth, man. As long as that Dabo just is something else, but that's neither here nor there. Let's get to North Korea. What do you think? President Trump, good thing, bad thing that he went into North Korea?
Well, I voted for Trump, and I'll vote for him again. I just feel like Kim Jong-un, whatever he is, I feel like he's playing Trump.
Yeah.
Just buying time. I think he's trying to. They've got the rocketry down. I think they're just trying to get a missile that'll go a little bit further, and he's just going. I like Trump. I like what he's done, but I agree with you. I think he falls a little short with his Korea thing, and they're going to play this thing out for 4 years, and I think they're going to try to play it out for 4 more years.
Yeah, I think you've got a pretty good read on that. I'm a little worried just because we know that probably around 2 months ago we started to hear word that they begin to again test some of those missiles, and so it's not good when we start to see progress relative to their missile development technologies, and we still have yet to get a denuclearization agreement set in. So, Forrest, thank you so much for your phone call.
You're very welcome. You have a nice day.
You as well. Okay, let's jump on over to Rick as well. Rick in Nevada. Rick, you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, Rick, what's your point of view?
I'm in agreement that Trump should have made that move that he did to go to the DMZ. But before I comment on that, I wanted to let you know that I really think your show is the pits.
Hey.
That is. But it's a little pun there.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, teaching Nick was the pits as well. It was a rough.
Oh, that's probably that was a trial of the faith, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I wanted to call because Newsmax magazine has an April issue that came out, and a great article appears in it called "The Global War on Christians."
Yeah.
And what I didn't know was that President Trump has been instrumental in leaning on countries, maybe by sanctions or maybe by our donation to them, however it may be, but to coerce the countries to be more responsible about protecting Christians in their country. And his effort in doing that has resulted in a number of countries calling out their military to protect villages and places that may need that kind of protection against foreign agents. I don't want to say Muslims as a blanket statement, but different groups and factions that are thinking they need to take over a village and kill all the Christians. So his efforts single-handedly, I think, have made an immense difference in the lives of many Christians that if he hadn't taken those steps, if he hadn't put himself out there to cause that to happen, they may still be suffering today.
Rick, you bring up
and maybe even dead today for all we know.
I mean, Rick, I'll agree with you. I mean, there's 2 instances that I'll call attention to that I want to applaud President Trump and his administration. Well, really 3 incidents his administration. First being relative to ISIS. The work that he did with ISIS, I think, is just so instrumental that we need to be aware of. That was just really did tamp down that, because again, ISIS wasn't just killing Christians; they were also killing fellow Muslims who they thought were traitors as well.
Agreed.
They were taking out Yazidi. So, like the efforts that he did there, we applaud him so much for what he did. Second thing of what he did, Pastor Brunson in Turkey got Pastor Brunson back out of Turkey. That was a huge win for him. Third is more his administration. So Ambassador Brownback, who's the U.S. ambassador for international religious freedom, has been instrumental in such a loud voice on the Uyghur Muslims in China right now. The Chinese are monitoring them, are putting them in internment camps right now. Ambassador Brownback has done great work to be able to illuminate what's happening right now among the Uyghur Muslims. Completely agree.
There you go.
But here's where I'll be the bad news bear, though. We've seen no movement whatsoever relative to the Christian or just any of the human rights abuses that have been happening in North Korea right now. Like I pulled up some of the research. Girls are being sold, officials are being executed, and citizens are starving in North Korea right now. A new report indicated that North Korean women and girls are being forced into marriages and sex slavery. A North Korean prostitute costs as little as $4, and a wife costs as approximately $146. So of the 25 million North Koreans, around 200,000 North Koreans have fled into China, with 60% being trafficked into the sex trade and 30% being forced into marriage. A recent UN report indicated that about 10 million North Koreans are suffering under severe food shortages after the worst harvest in a decade. They're bribing officials, and I misspoke, that it's around 50 to 75,000 Christians that are in penal camps right now. There's a report that was out of Canada that said Christians are being, quote, hung on a cross over a fire, crushed under a steamroller, herded off of bridges, and trampled underfoot. I think the Trump administration has done great work in Turkey, done great work in the Middle East among ISIS, has done great work to illuminate what's happening in China with the Uyghur Muslims. I think that there is still a significant amount of work to be done in North Korea right now.
Significant, and you're right. And at least there's a beginning now. At least there's a foothold there that can show, hopefully, a promise for those Christians, and they dearly need it. So
completely agree.
I enjoy your show, and thank you so much for what you bring to the insights for us to enjoy and get.
We appreciate you, Rick. Now, don't fall into any pits over the weekend. Grateful for you.
I'll work on that.
Now, let's jump on over to Brittany in Georgia before we have to go to a break. Brittany, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Brittany, what's your point of view?
Well, my point of view is in regards to Trump, in regards to him trying to mitigate the relationship with Kim Jong-un. As I mentioned earlier, I think he is doing a good job as far as to try to get that relationship started. In Proverbs, it says you can attract people with honey over vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for him to do it this way is the Christian way to be able to get that relationship going. And then by God's grace and by Trump getting the wisdom from other pastors and leaders, because I know he has a lot of advisors on his team,
mm-hmm.
which I think that's why he's doing it this way, that he's following the guidance that he's getting from his pastors and other leaders. I think this is the best way to go about it, because I'm sure everybody's relationship is different. For ISIS, he has to do it this way, and then for North Korea, I know he's going to deal with this issue, because it's not like Trump to just push it aside.
Yeah, I think you bring up some really great points, Brittany. I think one, you brought up a really great point relative to each country's different. I think that's right on. There's a great book by Richard Fisher that talks about this, when cultures collide, and how different cultures require different responses. I think one of the things that I'm keenly aware of, especially when it comes to foreign policy, is that presence is significantly valuable. And we know this just from interpersonal relationships. I can't get into the President of the United States. I can't get into the Oval Office right now, because I know that I have to have a certain merit. I know that I have to earn a certain favor just because of who he is. And I'm a little hesitant, just because not only did President Trump go to great lengths to go to Kim Jong-un and then to step over there, I just wonder how that's going to be used and to be able to prop up this regime that is so detrimental and harmful, not only to Christians, but also to the entire country. But thank you for your phone call. We've got to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. It's easy to misunderstand the law when it's confusing, but not when there are multiple clear decisions on the topic. In 1983, the U.S. Supreme Court concluded that a paid legislative chaplain is perfectly permissible under the Constitution. Then in 2014, in Town of Greece versus Galloway, the court said those prayers could even be sectarian without violating the Establishment Clause. But still, activists questioned the practice. In Mount Sterling, Ohio, village council members want to start their meetings with prayer. But activists insist that might be, quote, chipping away at the Establishment Clause. Well, that's hard to imagine, given that not only has the U.S. Supreme Court twice said that legislative prayers do not violate the Establishment Clause, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit said in the 2017 decision, Bournemouth versus County of Jackson, that those sectarian prayers can be offered by the lawmakers themselves. As Judge Sutton wrote, concurring in the en banc decision of the Sixth Circuit, quote, the United States Constitution does not tell federal judges to hover over each town hall meeting in the country like a helicopter parent, scolding, revising, okaying the content of this legislative prayer or that one, unquote. First Liberty Institute represented the County of Jackson in that case because we believe that all Americans, even elected officials, should be free to pray or not before public meetings and according to their own conscience. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined at the Millennial Roundtable by Michael McAfee. We have been talking about North Korea, and we have been asking the question and taking your phone calls. Was it a positive or a negative that President Trump stepped in to North Korea and met with Kim Jong-un without precondition? And so we have been taking some of your phone calls. We'd love to hear from you. Do you think that's a good thing? Do you think that's a bad thing? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Before we take any more phone calls, for those that are listening live right now, just so you know, timestamp, halftime, England, U.S., Women's National World Cup, we're up 2-1. So just so you know. So let's keep on going, phone lines. Let's jump on over to California. We've got Adam in California. Adam, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for taking my call.
Hey, you're very welcome. Adam, what's your point of view?
I got two sides of the coin. One point of view would be how strategic God could be when someone surrounds himself with the influence that Trump's surrounding himself with.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the American standards being under God and fearing God, and then him being exposed to so much Christianity and leadership. And then the other side is that Korea needs to understand that, controlling your people and not giving them their own mind to see what Christianity is about. I think if Trump, it's so amazing how he is actually finding his light in the midst of being our president.
Yeah. I think that you bring up two really great points. I think that's one of the things I see some of our listeners, just from the show notes that we've got on the phone calls right now, of just the need to pray for President Trump, the need to pray for Kim Jong-un. And I think that's one of the ways that I often pray for our president and those leaders and officials in authority. It's just that they would be surrounded by godly counsel. Mm-hmm. I'm always reminded of the story of Solomon's son, Rehoboth. I can never pronounce this. Rehoboam, yeah. And how he had those counselors. He had good counselors and he had bad counselors. Unfortunately, he chose the bad counselors that really just perpetuated just a very detrimental, not just his reign, but also the reigns that would continue past him. And I think that's one of the ways that I always want to pray for our president and those in authority, is that they would just be surrounded by wise counsel, so that even though they might not have the wisdom to make a decision, that they've surrounded themselves with wise individuals that would have the insight in order to make those decisions. Are there other ways, and this might be a little pivot point that we can take before we take the next phone call, Michael, are there other ways that you would counsel individuals as to how they could pray for our officials that are in authority?
No, I agree. I think that's a great one. In general, we want the gospel to be made clear. Yeah. And I think that is in some ways being answered in a way potentially now that we didn't expect, mm-hmm. which is in an increasingly secularized society that does push back against our faith morality. The gospel is being made increasingly clear because it is costing us something to be mm-hmm. identify ourselves with Christ. It's costing us social capital. It's costing us potential opportunities, perhaps, depending on the line of work that you're in, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And so when we pray for our leaders, I think that in helping to pray for them, that the gospel be made clear to them and that the gospel be made clear through them, even if they're not a Christian, but that in the decisions that they're making, that they might open up opportunities for us to minister, or keep open opportunities that the gospel might go forth.
Yeah, that's really good. Let's continue to take phone calls. And speaking of prayer, let's go to Lorraine out in California right now. Lorraine, are you there?
I am.
Hey.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. What is your point of view, Ms. Lorraine?
So you made a statement earlier in regards to Kim and his being kind of despicable and the things that he has done. And I thought about Saul before he became Paul. Mm-hmm. And we do not know what God has in store for the people of North Korea or Kim. And, probably people thought Barnabas was nuts when he took Paul under his wing. So, yeah, he's done some horrible things, but so have a lot of other people. And we all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and God can make miracles and do huge things through individuals. So that was just a thought that I had and thought I would bring it about. Yet, yes, we don't like what people do, their behavior that is devastating to people and causes death. But God is smarter than we are. So that's so true. Thank you so much, Lorraine.
I'm often, just because I've got some ties to individuals that are intricately tied into North Korea, and so Lorraine, I do hear you. Like, I want to be a man that prays daily for Kim Jong-un to come to know the Lord, and but I also will be a man that will not call evil good and will not denigrate that. He is allowing women and girls to be sold. He's literally operating intermittent camps for Christians to die. I think I'll stand by the claim. So I'll pray for him, but I'm also hoping that I'm gonna call it for what it is. So let's jump on over to Florida right now. We got Janine is on the phone. Yes, ma'am. Are you there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Okay. What's your point of view?
My point of view is praise God for Donald Trump. whenever I first heard he was running, I thought, oh, my Lord, no, I'll never vote for that man.
When he came down that elevator?
But you know what? God put just a real love and appreciation for his bullish nature. When I think about Ahab and Jezebel, they are characteristic of Obama and Hillary. And then the next one that came along was the other king that came along was not a Christian, but he was a bullish, ornery person. But he was the one that God used in that time to do what he wanted to do. And you know what? Who in the world are we to think we're so smart that we can say, he doesn't need to go there, he doesn't need to talk to this person or that person? Our job is to hold his arms up before the Lord and pray for him every day. And I do many times a day. I never even stop and say a prayer that I don't lift him up and lift up a piece of Jerusalem. You know, Jesus is fixing to come back. And we've got a lot of preparation to do before he gets here. But I just thank God that President Trump has been able to do what he's been able to do. I mean, I'm 82 years old, and I've seen a lot of stuff go under the bridge.
Who's been your favorite president? I'd like to know. 82 years. I'd love to know who your favorite president was.
Him, and then Reagan prior to him.
Ooh, Reagan.
But
you were probably a teenager during Eisenhower, right?
Yeah. And I believe Eisenhower was the first one that I voted for. My family were so totally, I was born in Georgia, and my family was so totally Democrat.
Oh, yeah. It's a Democratic South during that time.
Not one time did I ever vote Democrat because I met the Lord as a young person.
Well, thank you, Miss Janine. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have got to be going. But we thank you so much for your phone call. And for listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. It has been a joy. Thank you. Michael, thanks for the time, my man. Greatly appreciate it. Be sure to go to the Point of View website, www.pointofview.net. You can find Michael's book. Be sure to buy 1, 7, or 15 copies for all your friends and enemies. And we have got to go, but thanks so much for joining us.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants his best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.